Hello, all you freedom-loving people. Many people may have been surprised by President Trump inviting Bill Maher for dinner, but there's no denying the fact that he knows how to use the media to increase his influence. Okay, let's get into it. On Friday, the Trump administration was ordered to facilitate the return of Obrego Garcia back to the United States, who was wrongly deported to El Salvador. But the Supreme Court order acknowledged that the government could not be forced to, given that the individual is in the custody of a foreign nation. In one of its responses on April 13th, the administration said that it could only take steps to remove domestic obstacles to help the man return. They cannot force the El Salvadoran government to release him. Then, on Monday, Salvadoran President Nayib Bukele met with President Trump at the White House. Bukele told President Trump that the illegal alien that was deported back to his home country of El Salvador will not be returned to the United States. Bukele said, "You're suggesting I smuggle a terrorist into the United States? I'm not going to do it. The question is preposterous." In the meeting, Attorney General Pam Bondi said that that's up to El Salvador if they want to return him. That's not up to us. Bukele also said, "You cannot just free the criminals and think crime is going to go down magically. We're not very fond of releasing criminals in our country." Real-time host Bill Maher has long been a critic of President Trump, but not only did he accept President Trump's invitation to meet at the White House, he also said that President Trump was gracious and measured during his visit.
I never felt I had to walk on eggshells around him. And honestly, I voted for Clinton and Obama, but I would never feel comfortable talking to them the way I was able to talk with Donald Trump. That's just how it went down. Make of it what you will. Me, I feel it's emblematic of why the Democrats are so unpopular these days. He was even okay when I checked him on the orangutan lawsuit. He was. He said to Dana White, Bill said my father was an orangutan, and I really love my father. And I said, well, Mr. President, I did that because I didn't like what you were doing regarding Obama's birth origins. I thought that was low. Again, no anger, just a little smile, as if to say, yeah, I get it.
Bill Maher also noted that President Trump displays a very different personality in private than in public.
He's much more self-aware than he lets on in public. Look, I get it. It doesn't matter who he is at a private dinner with a comedian. It matters who he is on the world stage. I'm just taking as a positive that this person exists, because everything I've ever not liked about him was, I swear to God, absent, at least on this night with this guy. Bob, Kid Rock, told me the night before, he said, if you want to get a word in edgewise, you're going to have to cut him off. He'll just go on. Not at all. I've had so many conversations with prominent people who are much less connected, people who don't look you in the eye, people who don't really listen because they just want to get to their next thing, people whose response to things you say just doesn't track, like, what? None of that with him. And he mostly steered the conversation to, what do you think about this? I know, your mind is blown, so's mine.
Bill Maher anticipated that his warm words might not be well received by progressives, so in the opening of his program, Bill Maher began by telling people not to take his meeting with President Trump as being too important.
And let me first say that to all the people who treated this like it was some kind of summit meeting, you're ridiculous. Like I was going to sign a treaty or something. I have no power. I'm a f***ing comedian, and he's the most powerful leader in the world. I'm not the leader of anything, except maybe a contingent of centrist-minded people who think there's got to be a better way of running this country than hating each other every minute.
Bill Maher was a Trump critic for years. In fact, President Trump disliked him just as much.
First good sign, before I left for the Capitol, I had my staff collect and print out this list of almost 60 different insulting epithets that the president has said about me. Things like stupid, dummy, lowlife dummy, sleazebag, sick, sad, stone cold crazy. Really a dumb guy, fired like a dog, his show is dead. There's 60. I brought this to the White House because I wanted him to sign it. which he did. Which he did with good humor.
But they did seem to get along well that night.
And he gave me a bunch of hats, but he didn't ask me to take a picture in one, which I appreciated. The guy I met is not the person who the night before the dinner tweeted a bunch of nasty crap about how he thought this dinner was a bad idea and what a deranged asshole I was. I read it and thought, oh, what a lovely way to welcome someone to your house. But when I got there, that guy wasn't living there. Now, does Trump want respect? Of course, who doesn't? My friend said to me, what are you going to wear to the White House? I said, I don't know, but I'm not going to dress like Zelensky, I'll tell you that. But, okay. Just for starters, he laughs. I'd never seen him laugh in public, but he does, including at himself. And it's not fake. Believe me, as a comedian of 40 years, I know a fake laugh when I hear it. And I thank you for them.
Bill Maher made opponents of President Trump a little nervous with his description of President Trump. Washington Post columnist Josh Rogin criticized Maher's decision to visit the White House, and he suggested that Maher had used it as a PR stunt. Josh Rogin said, I think you've fallen into the trap, and I think I represent 99% of the internet when I say this. You've played the game of proximity as principle. I'm not questioning your motivation, I'm questioning Trump's, okay? The praise seemed to have struck a nerve with Maher. He pushed back and said, not everybody has to like it. That's what we said. There are people who didn't want it to happen at all. You sound like one of them. It's okay. Piers Morgan, on the other hand, thinks that the way Josh Rogin interprets the situation is too simplistic. He pointed out that most Americans aren't as tribal as social media might lead people to believe. Piers Morgan said, actually, most Americans and most Brits, they're not like that. And then the idea that Bill Maher is now going to stop criticizing Donald Trump is preposterous. Maher affirmed Pierce's comments, noting that he didn't hold back on President Trump during his opening monologue or during his interview with Steve Bannon earlier in the show. Last week, we reported that Apple was scrambling to airlift Apple phone parts from Asia to the United States in order to avoid too much of a price hike in production costs. However, in the long run, no matter how many parts Apple stockpiled ahead of time, it may not have solved the underlying problem. So, unexpectedly, on Friday, the White House gave tech companies a break. On Friday night, the U.S. Customs and Border Protection Agency announced that various electronic devices such as smartphones and computers would be exempt from tariffs imposed on China. According to the analysis, the amount from China in this exemption is about $100 billion for the whole year, accounting for about 20% of China's total exports to the United States. While this gives the Chinese Communist government a bit of a breather, the benefit for American consumers and tech giants are more substantial. According to statistics, 73% of smartphones and 78% of laptops in the U.S. are produced in China. This exemption is particularly favorable to Apple, Dell, NVIDIA, and other companies with many manufacturing bases in China. And NVIDIA just said that it will produce supercomputers entirely built in the United States.
Look at NVIDIA on the left-hand side of the screen. They've announced they will manufacture AI supercomputers in the United States. They'll be building more than 1 million square feet of manufacturing space in Texas and in Arizona.
White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt explained on Saturday by saying, President Trump has made it clear America cannot rely on China to manufacture critical technology such as semiconductors, chips, smartphones, and laptops. However, the complete transfer of the production chain of Apple and other companies to the United States is by no means easy. It not only involves complex technical difficulties, but it will also take several years and the cost may also climb significantly. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick said said on Sunday that the exemption from the reciprocal tariffs on a range of electronic devices is only a temporary exemption. These products will fall under separate tariff plans, which may be announced in a month or so. White House senior counselor and trade advisor Peter Navarro said that the tariffs will be determined through an investigation of the chip supply chain. Lutnick said that tariffs on semiconductors and pharmaceuticals are necessary to incentivize the reshoring of their production back to the United States. He also said, we need to have semiconductors, we need to have chips, and we need to have flat panels. We need to have these things made in America. We can't be relying on the Southeast Asia for all of the things that operate for us. Virtually all semiconductors are made now in Taiwan, and they're finished in China. Even though this exemption is temporary, U.S. stock futures rose as the waiver boosted market confidence. Major Asia-Pacific stock markets advanced in tandem on Monday, with Japanese, Korean, and Taiwanese stocks rebounding significantly, led by technology stocks. Indeed, public opinion of President Trump is very polarized. There are many people claiming that they just can't figure him out. But if you read President Trump's best-selling book, The Art of the Deal, which was published in 1987, we may get some clues. The autobiography that was ghostwritten by journalist Tony Schwartz details President Trump's childhood experiences with real estate deals, and it offers brief business advice. Business Insider reporter Alice Tukoczki read the book and came away with 6 insights. These insights may help us to understand the strategic thinking behind President Trump's tariff policies. The first insight, Tukoczki explained that President Trump's deal-making philosophy is simple. In the book, President Trump says, I aim very high, and then I just keep pushing and pushing and pushing to get what I'm after. Sometimes I settle for less than what I sought, but in most cases I still end up with what I want. His recent actions continue to reflect this mentality. The rates of tariffs he has imposed on foreign countries have been much higher than most people predicted. When dealing with the CCP, President Trump naturally follows the push and push approach. Just take a look at the ever-escalating battle between the two sides and we'll understand this. However, President Trump doesn't want everyone to learn this approach. He said, because that would just make it a much tougher world for me. Another insight from the book is what President Trump says, I don't hire a lot of number crunchers and I don't trust fancy marketing surveys. When President Trump announced the tariffs, he challenged the opinions of many mainstream economists, prominent CEOs, and the political wisdom of conservatives. And when the stock market shook, it made sense to still stick to his plan. Let's take a look at members of President Trump's team. His Treasury and Commerce secretaries are not classroom academics, but they are veterans who have spent decades on the front lines of Wall Street. That's why they make policies not to be understood by academics, but to get results. They don't care what the world says about them, but whether their opponents will be defeated. The third insight is all's well that ends well. This feature is in the same vein as the second one. The book mentions an example of President Trump's lengthy legal battle with the residents of 100 Central Park South in New York. After President Trump bought the building, he tried to initiate a demolition, and he clashed with the original tenants. Although the tenants ultimately kept their apartments, President Trump wrote that in the end he won because the market fluctuated during that period, which ultimately made him more money. Now that the tariff war is not yet over, it's hard to tell what the final outcome will be. But we've already seen the financial and political chaos in the previous period, so perhaps this tariff war will change the world's political landscape, and then its significance will go far beyond economic interests. The fourth insight is we won by wearing everyone else down. As it is a war, of course, it's impossible to not pay a price. But in the end, the victory often goes to the one who sticks it out to the end. This is easy to understand. In his book, President Trump mentioned that he negotiated a real estate deal on West 34th Street in New York by exhausting his opponent. He wrote, "In the end, we won by wearing everyone else down. We never gave up and the opposition slowly began to melt away." The initial victory in the current tariff war is almost identical. More than 75 countries have now asked to negotiate with the United States, but the Chinese Communist government is still in a standoff, so we'll have to see just how long the CCP can hold out. At number 5, the book focuses more on the physical world, like buildings, but President Trump not only cares about prices, he also thinks about topics such as architectural style, concrete, and the color of marble building materials. The Art of the Deal also revisits President Trump's real estate successes like the Commodore Hotel and Trump Tower. During this administration, we've seen that he's not only concerned about the economy, he's also concerned about American manufacturing, and he's also concerned about other practical things like the water pressure of our shower heads and the regulation associated with gas stoves and washing machines. In a True Social post on Tuesday, President Trump said, "He's the president who stands up for Main Street, not Wall Street." The sixth insight is about the media and critics, who he says can't be trusted, but getting press is generally a good thing. This is an interesting one. It may also be what prevents many people from understanding President Trump. President Trump is a verbal tactician. He knows how to use words to create attention and controversy in order to turn up the heat. He doesn't always speak specifically, but there's an intent behind every word. These behaviors are not out of control, but a carefully crafted layout of public opinion. He knows how to use a phrase or a tweet to spark market volatility, to ignite public controversy, and to then take advantage of the chaos in order to advance his goals. You can argue that it's not presidential, but you can't deny that he's managed to get the attention of the world. In his book, President Trump wrote several times that media exposure is an inevitable and important part of being a public figure. And even if it is negative, it can still work in his favor. President Trump wrote, "From a pure business point of view, the benefits of being written about have far outweighed the drawbacks." He also said that the more outrageous projects tend to attract more attention. So we can now understand a little more about why President Trump often makes outlandish statements and seemingly crazy schemes. In an emotional age, the real scarcity in the world has never been anger, but sobriety. President Trump singling out of China as the primary target of this round of tariffs is impressive. A new article by a former White House official on China reveals the process of President Trump's changing perception of the Chinese Communist Party. The article was written by Matt Pottinger, who served as Deputy Director of the National Security Council during President Trump's first term, and by Liza Tobin, the National Security Council's Director for China. The U.S.-China trade war, they say, is more of a race for dominance in the 21st century. The two sides are represented by President Trump and by Xi Jinping. But this is about much more than just trade, and like it or not, the competition is pretty much zero-sum. So whatever is gained by one side is lost by the other. If we think back to the trade war that started in 2018, President Trump was not so hostile to the CCP at that time. As officials who have worked on President Trump's staff, they revealed that during President Trump's first term, the president spent most of his time thinking that he could negotiate a reduction in China's trade surplus with the United States. We may all remember President Trump incessantly praising Xi Jinping during those years. But in 2020, things changed. President Trump told a small group of advisors that even 100 trade deals with China wouldn't make up for the losses that the United States suffered from the COVID shock. President Trump said, "I'm not sure we can do business with China anymore, and it may be time to decouple." It's fair to say that this idea has been on President Trump's mind ever since. He said last Tuesday, "Look, I get along with President Xi, I have over the years, but you know, when COVID came, that was the end, that was it. That was called the bridge too far." However, people may ask, hasn't President Trump also expressed his wish to cooperate with Beijing on the TikTok deal and even considered tariff reductions to negotiate? So Pottinger also unpacked President Trump's seemingly inconsistent response to the issue. He wrote, "Might Trump's deal-making instinct reassert itself and overtake his decoupling instinct?" Might he offer a temporary reprieve to China or partial tariff relief in exchange for Xi's blessing to sell Americans a larger stake in TikTok? It wouldn't surprise us, but a comprehensive grand bargain that sets aside the U.S. arch rivalry has never been more distant. Why? Because there simply exists no deal that could plausibly fix the fundamental problem. Beijing's economic model is designed as a means to political, not just economic dominance around the globe. The authors say that the economic war stems from Xi's broader ideological agenda to construct what he calls a commonwealth of human destiny, a blueprint for replacing U.S. global dominance with the Communist Party of China. As Xi openly stated in an official publication within the CCP, our struggle in contest with the West is irreconcilable. Xi believes that he is facing a once-in-a-century opportunity to remake the world order. So what's next for President Trump? The authors suggest that President Trump might improvise his way into success by isolating China rather than alienating most of the free world. In any case, the United States, the European Union, Japan, the United Kingdom, and Australia together account for about 56% of global consumption. This is a huge economic bloc. China, by contrast, accounts for only 13% of global consumption, despite being a country with a large population. And that's a wrap for this episode. Thank you so much for your support of Front Page. Please remember that every like, comment, and share helps more people to see the truth. If you haven't already, please subscribe. And if you have already subscribed, we thank you, but please double check to make sure that you're still subscribed, because some of our audience have reported that they're somehow unsubscribed without their knowledge. We've also heard that some of you don't get notifications of our videos anymore on YouTube. So when you do subscribe on YouTube, please make sure to tap the notification bell as well. Okay, this is our show for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you like what you heard today, please don't forget to like this video and share it with your friends and family, because everybody deserves to know the truth.